Should schools reopen? For which classes? When? These are questions that are being debated at this moment all across the country. We'll look at what's happening in Indian states at this moment. We'll look at what's happening globally. And we'll ask the question, is it time to go back to school?
Time to go back to school? Should online classes go offline? No vaccine for kids yet. Are schools safe for children? Experts say yes. Parents vary. The school's reopening suspense. Top focus on Newstrack.
Is it time for our kids to go back to school? Schools across India have been shut for nearly 60 weeks now. With cases dipping, some states have begun offline classes for older students. But what about primary school kids? India's top medical voice and member of the National COVID Task Force, Dr. Randeep Guleria, has told India Today that the time has come to start reopening schools in a staggered manner. Other experts too are now of the opinion that schools should be reopened since children are least at risk. But how safe will this be? That's what we look at on the show.
Children can handle viral infections much better than adults. Young children, it has been established, have lower number of receptors. That is, the ACE receptors is much lower in children where the virus attaches. Once India starts considering, and the districts start considering, it will be wise to open primary schools first.
A step forward by the government, an indication that there is a possibility of opening up schools even before the vaccination for children starts. Though the government has said that the staff needs to get vaccinated first, the statement comes a day after India's most respected voices in our fight against COVID-19 told India Today that schools must start to open up.
So I'm one who is a proponent that we should work on a strategy for opening up schools because for multiple reasons. I think opening up schools and having students coming physically has a lot of benefit. It's not only the e-learning, it's the character development, the social interaction that children have at school. We need to develop a strategy that all of them can come back to the education system.
Despite possibility of another wave, dipping cases are giving hope like never before. But the key will be laying out a careful roadmap and mounting effective surveillance.
If the cases rise, we can always close the schools down again. But having it closed for such a long time is causing more harm than good. And therefore, I personally feel that we should look at strategies for opening up schools in areas where now cases are very low.
The AIIMS chief stressed the role of schools in wholesome child development, underlining its critical importance in imparting life skills.
I think opening up schools and having students coming physically has a lot of benefit. It's not only the e-learning, it's the character development, the social interaction that children have at school.
While vaccines for kids are on the horizon, the natural immunity in the young is also a big advantage that kids enjoy.
The vaccine trial is doing well. It is now in the stage of observing to see for safety and antibody and the immunity. The recruitment is over, so I am very hopeful that we should have robust data in September, and hopefully we should be able to then develop strategies for vaccination in children.
While top medical experts want schools to reopen, the Delhi Chief Minister has sounded a cautious note.
एक बार ही हम देखना चाहेंगे, जैसे मैंने पहले कहा था, आइडियल सिचुएशन तो ये है कि वैक्सीनेशन के बाद ही हो. बाकी राज्यों के अंदर अगर स्कूल खुल रहे हैं, उनके एक्सपीरियंसेस अच्छे रहे, तो थोड़े दिन देखते हैं हम लोग.
So is it time to breathe life back to our schools? And is it time our kids break the shackles of pandemic?
Clearly, this is a gamble. It is a risk. But how many parents and schools and authorities are then willing to take this risk? Opinion is clearly divided on this. But many parents say that this is an idea whose time clearly has come. In New Delhi, Sneha Murdani for India Today.
Earlier, most parents and teachers had thought that this year too was written off as far as schools and academics were concerned, that schools would reopen only in 2022. But now, with the COVID pandemic situation seeming to come under control, there's a huge debate about when and whether schools can reopen. We're already seeing from the director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, from the Indian Council for Medical Research, top experts coming out and saying it's safe for schools to reopen. And in some states, a gradual partial reopening has commenced. Is it safe to send our children back to school? To talk about this, I'm joined on this broadcast by Dr. Amita Wattal, a well-known academic. We have with us Zubin Malhotra, he's a career coach and counsellor. We have Rajiv Dasgupta, chairperson at the Center of Social Medicine, Community Health. We also have Jyoti Arora, governing body member of the CBSE. And we have Dr. Raghuram, who is the head and director of neonatology at La Fortis La Femme. So thank you to all our guests for joining us. I want to go across first to Dr. Amita Wattal on whether you think it's safe for schools to reopen. Are you looking at all these experts coming out and saying that let's start reopening schools in a calibrated fashion, and at this moment, would you be comfortable opening the doors of your schools again?
Thank you for that, Rahul. I think absolutely it's time that, in fact, it should have been done sooner than later. And I think it's very, very essential that schools should open. We have to find a balance between health and education. And the way we're looking at learning right now, it's a big challenge. Students have lost out a great deal. Across nearly 2 years now, and whether it is, in fact, primary children more so. There have been some online with the others, but you don't judge online education for private education, because a whole load of children in India are without schooling at all. And so can you imagine 2 years of not being connected to what is the most
So would you
crucial
open primary and senior school at the same time? Because the ICMR says start with primary schools because their younger children can handle viral infections much better?
I would be opening it in a staggered manner. I already am opening schools in a staggered manner. And I think there are various states that I'm connected with who are opening schools in a staggered manner. Some states are doing it with primary. I will be a little cautious with primary because of the fact that, very difficult for young children to have their masks on and so on, because that is essential. And they are going to be meeting larger crowds. But I think that if we, especially if the middle school can easily open, 6th, 7th, 8th grade should open, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th should open. And then perhaps we should look at the primary schools. The foundational stage is not yet. I think nursery, kindergarten, 1, 2 should be left aside. I think we can look at classes, say 4 and 5, but in a staggered manner once the school is used to opening with the senior and at the middle level. So there will be a certain understanding of how to go forward. There must be a parents' walk. We must ensure that there is a parents' walk and parents move around before schools are open, so that they can be part of the opening process, because they are the most important stakeholders, and they should feel a certain sense of belief in what we're doing. They should believe, and I think if one parent has the courage to send out its child, I'm sure that the others will sort of follow suit. I've been seeing that in Gurgaon itself, some schools are opening. I've seen schools opening in the states of in Tamil Nadu. Schools are opening in some parts of Karnataka, in some parts of Kerala. So I'm aware of that because I've been connected with school opening at these state levels. And I think it's a great initiative, and we have to get on, because everybody is anyway saying that nobody really knows when the third wave will come. It will come when it will come. But until we have these windows, we mustn't let learning go.
So on the one side, Dr. Raghuram, are concerns about learning and socialization for young children. On the other side are concerns about health. Given where we are between the second wave and this uncertain, unknown third wave, would you feel comfortable sending children back to school? Is it medically advisable and safe?
Rahul, I think it's a very important debate, and there's no right or wrong about this. But I think restarting schools is a very important process for us to re-establish our normalcy in society for what it was after we suffered through the COVID business. If you go by purely the technical and the scientific and even the epidemiological data that we have, this is not a bad time to restart schools, mainly because even if you look at all the seroprevalence studies, most of the kids, even in the age group between 6 to 10, almost 57% across the country. Obviously, this varies from region to region, but on an average, about 57-58% are carrying natural immunity for the COVID bug. Also, if you look at the rate of infectivity in most parts, barring some states across India, the infectivity rate has been the lowest. So if you take all these into account, I think based on pure scientific and technical advice, this may be a good opportunity to restart schools.
No, but what if there are kids who haven't been exposed to the virus yet? They come together with relatively low immunity, they contract the virus, they give it to their whole class, and suddenly you will have a cluster outbreak. Would you then need to shut schools down? And that's what would be spooking parents out.
I was just coming to that point, Rahul. So the rate of infectivity is so low now. For example, in our own hospital, we have not seen a single case of COVID positive patient in the last 4 weeks or so. So the rate
not
of
a single COVID positive patient.
No, but we are not a COVID hospital,
sure.
So we don't see so many, but we screen almost all the patients who get admitted to our hospital. So we have hardly seen any patient who's been positive for COVID in the last. If you see in the whole of Delhi, we're having 44, 45 cases a day, which is very, very low. And I don't think we'll reach this low levels of infectivity on a regular basis. But this is a window of opportunity for us to do it. But having said that, there is always a concern that when we restart schools, like you said, it just takes 1 or 2 children to pass on infections. But we have to remember the transmission, the patterns of transmission in children is very poorly understood even now. Even if you look at the WHO white papers, they're not entirely sure of how infection is transmitted through children. One thing for sure is children do tend to get a much less severe disease than what is seen in adults. And even if they do become symptomatic, the serious disease occurrence in them is very low. That also poses a risk because they don't become symptomatic. They may be carrying and spreading it to other people. And that's why I said that the process of transmission of the virus is still very poorly understood in children.
You know, one of the things that I'm concerned about, Zubin, is when our children go back to school, will they feel sociable? Because they've been locked on their screens for almost 2 years now, 1.5 years at least. And at least I feel with my children, they aren't used to playing with other kids as you'd expect them to if they were going to school every day. Therefore, you know, how difficult would it be, and how should parents and teachers possibly try and get them back into the schooling groove with minimum disruptions?
You know, there'll be multiple aspects and challenges. It'll not just be about them. I think them getting back into a routine, or them getting back into interacting and socializing and seeing teachers face to face after, you know, 1.5 years or so. Those are perhaps the easier bits that'll happen, especially for the younger kids, for them just to actually sit in a classroom, you know, from 8 in the morning till 1 or 2 in the afternoon. That kind of change which they've not been used to would be harder things that you know, they would encounter. I absolutely agree you know, with Dr. Bhattal saying that, you know, it's absolutely essential that schools do reopen, but I would err on the side of caution. Schools have the potential, you know, it's from cramped classrooms to washrooms to kids going in buses, kids coming from all different you know, places, put together. It really has the potential for being a super spreader, and all it requires is 1 or 2 instances for this to happen.
So what is it that you're suggesting, Zubin Malhotra? You're saying don't push
to a stop start.
No, so you're saying don't push children back to school just yet, hold back for the whole year?
No, absolutely. And I would say you should start off with the class 11 and 12 students. Those are students who have practicals. Those are students who perhaps you know, require, and they can behave more responsibly. You can space them out. Start with those, see how that goes, help them in their critical board year. So if that means at some point also getting some of the class 10 students in, start with those. Hopefully by the beginning of next year is when what I'm hearing is, you know, when at all vaccines would be available for people under 18. So which is when these students start getting it. And, you know, you've possibly crossed you know, a potential third wave. We've seen the waves being a little more delayed in India than rest of the world. So you've anyway almost gone through close to half of this academic year. Wait and watch a little bit, because these are children that you're talking about. So you've got to be doubly cautious.
So you're suggesting that don't rush back into school, even though there's a growing view that, you know, it's safe even now for schools to start reopening. Rajiv Das Gupta, how are you viewing this whole question of whether it's safe to go back to school at this moment for our children, opinion seems to be very sharply divided.
Thank you. There are two ways of looking at it. One, of course, is the set of technical guidelines, which is prepared by WHO, UNICEF, and UNESCO. And the other is the experience of schools opening, closing, of these various experiences globally. 2 or 3 basic things first need to be understood. First, that 12 years is a cutoff. Above 12 years, as far as COVID goes, COVID infection susceptibility as well as disease transmission goes, the older children and adolescents behave more like adults. And in the younger children, the infection is much less. And therefore, it makes a lot more epidemiological sense to open up with the younger children than with the older children, though from the education point of view, the broad brush view is at the other pole, which is open up the higher schools. They are more important in terms of education and so on. So the younger children actually have lower risk. Okay. At the same time, it won't be business as usual or schooling as usual. So there are going to be changes. There are very detailed SOPs. All school administrators are familiar with them. And the whole purpose of those SOPs is actually to make this experience safer, but then it won't be the same experience.
You know, parents seem to be deeply divided on the issue of whether it's safe to send their children back to school at this moment or not, because on the one side you have the concern that children are losing out on crucial life skills by staying at home. On the other hand, you know, you're worried about sending your child to school and then having to deal with the health and medical consequences of that, because at this moment it isn't certain when there will be a third wave and what form it may take.
As a parent, there is nothing I want more than for my kids to go back to school. They're missing out on the golden years of their lives because of this pandemic. The whole world seems to have started school physically again, and I truly, truly hope that our children get to experience that this year. I know the thoughts of the third wave, and especially the third wave affecting children, is something that scares every parent, me included. But I think somewhere we need to have faith and come up with solutions, because how long is this going to go on, right? We have to be able to give our children that experience. And as a parent, I really, really pray that we get there sooner than later.
There is so much going on about the third wave, specifically for children, risky for people who have not taken the vaccine as yet. But we should not even talk about schools right now, because there's so much of uncertainty going on here that why will we take that chance? Even if, let's say, it's not risky for kids, what about those people who have already taken the vaccine in the past 6 months? We don't know yet if the vaccine needs a booster or not. So there's so much going on right now. And what have we learned from our second wave, the devastating one? We have not even, families are not over it yet. And I think most of us have forgotten about it already.
The physical interaction between the teachers and students is very important. The pandemic has brought about a huge, lifestyle change in the kids, and not a good one at that. The kids are highly stressed. They have heavy fatigue and emotional turmoil because, their future is uncertain. They don't know what's going to happen. And I'm sure the school authorities will ensure the strongest of discipline and social distancing measures. Like mandatory face masks, fewer children physically present per class, make sure at least the staff's fully vaccinated.
8-year-old Nitya and 11-year-old Nainika spend their time playing around when they don't have online classes. They live in Noida, a Delhi suburb where the positivity rate of COVID is way below 5%, which means there is little circulation of the virus. Thousands of kilometers away in Shillong, 8-year-old Ishan is in the same situation. The only difference is that Ishan's hometown Shillong is seeing a positivity rate of more than 10%. That means the pandemic is still very much a threat. Children, thousands of kilometers apart, but living the same life that the pandemic has forced them to. Parents of children say this is not the life that they want for their kids.
If we can take our children to the malls and take them up to the hills for holidays, most certainly we can send them to school. I do believe it should open with proper protocol. The parents should be vaccinated, the staff should be vaccinated, and whenever it opens up, the children should be vaccinated as well. But we will eventually have to learn to live with this virus, and it is important that children get as much normalcy as possible.
I think that Dr. Guleria's statement is extremely balanced and mature, because we can't get away from the fact that schools should remain closed. All over the world, schools are opening. They're opening in bubbles. They're being staggered in their opening, because we can't afford to lose out. It's been nearly 2 years now, and our children have no education.
In an interview to India Today, Dr. Randeep Guleria has said that districts having positivity rates of less than 5% should open up schools in a staggered way.
We will see an increase in number of cases, and that will count for the third wave. When it happens will depend a lot on how our behavior is. If we are able to have COVID appropriate behavior, if we have good surveillance, if we have good containment strategies, then we will not see a surge in cases, and we may be able to delay the third week to even up to 6 to 8 weeks.
Experts, vaccinologists and epidemiologists are of the opinion that much of the apprehensions around opening of schools is actually based on an alarmist sort of a discourse in India that the third wave is going to affect children severely, and that there is no truth to that. They say that many countries, about 170 of them, have opened up schools, and many of these children going to schools outside of India have not got the vaccine against COVID-19. This is an option that India must explore.
We need to remember that online learning cannot be a replacement for in-person school learning, where children interact with each other, and that contributes to their holistic development and learning, like physical, mental, social, and behavioral development. So we need to open a school, and online learning is not a replacement. What policymakers and parents need to remember that in an overzealous attempt to protect our children from COVID-19, we should not end up depriving them of quality education.
But not all parents agree that it's time to reopen the schools.
I'm not ready to send my son to school yet. There are a couple of reasons for that. In our state, the rate of vaccination is very staggered. The positivity rate is above 10%, with an average of about 10 deaths daily and 500 new cases on an average. So keeping that in mind, I think prevention is better than cure. So I'd rather keep him at home for a couple of more months till we are more prepared towards this disease.
जब तक अभी वैक्सीनेशंस पूरे नहीं होते, 100% वैक्सीनेशंस नहीं होते, तब तक मुझे जहाँ तक लगता है इट्स नॉट सेफ, क्योंकि अभी अपने वैक्सीनेशंस अभी अप टू मार्क नहीं आया है, और उसके बाद अगर बच्चों को वैक्सीनेशन के बाद अगर स्कूल भेजने का होता तो मैं एक बार भेजती।
ये ऑनलाइन क्लासेस का जो फिलहाल जो चल रहा है सिस्टम, हमें लगता है वो ही चलते रहना चाहिए। हम ये भी मानते हैं कि बहुत सारे बच्चों को ऑनलाइन क्लासेस की सुविधाएं उपलब्ध नहीं हो पा रही है, तो वो सुविधा करवाना वो सरकारों की जिम्मेदारी है, चाहे केंद्र सरकार हो चाहे राज्य सरकार हो।
Globally, it is estimated that every month away from school results in 2 months of learning loss. If that's the case, then children in India have already lost learning equal to 32 months. With Kumar Kunal and Sneha Murdani, Bureau Report, India Today.
Keeping children at home, away from their friends, away from the pre-pandemic normal life as we know it, can have a serious bearing on your child's mental health. Is your child showing any signs of social anxiety and behavioral changes? You know, the doctors have listed out a whole bunch of red flags you could be looking out for.
Four-year-old Vanya's school day begins at 8:30 a.m. in front of a screen. Books and internet consume much of her time these days. Now, as schools get ready to reopen, Vanya is used to her new normal. She wants more screen time. Vanya's mother is worried about the change in her behavior.
घर में रह के तो इतना ज़्यादा परेशान करने लगे हैं ना, वो स्कूल जाना नहीं होता है और या तो फ़ोन चाहिए या फिर लैपटॉप चाहिए पूरा दिन.
Experts say there are many signs that indicate children's changing mental health. They include excessive hyperactivity, sadness or boredom, wanting to engage with the screen, sleeping difficulties, unhealthy eating habits, and lack of concentration.
Younger children are noted to have reduced interactiveness and delayed speech development, excessive clinginess and excessive dependence on one of the parents. And school-going children, we are noting them to be more anger and hyperactivity was noted due to missing their routines, and excessive violence due to unsupervised screen time, and unexplained abnormal behavior due to boredom.
13.
So what should a parent do?
Stay calm, listen out to their concerns, provide comfort and reassurance. One of the most important role of parents is to provide a safe, secure and healthy environment and spend as much time as possible with them.
The younger population, the little ones, are still not vaccinated and are some months away from even receiving a vaccine of COVID-19. The Sero survey in India says that many children may have already developed antibodies, but they have not tested, so one does not know what the future will be like. Till then, children remain elusive to the joys of education inside schools. With Sanjeev in New Delhi, Milan Sharma for India Today.
Now, this is a real concern that parents have, that their children are increasingly getting used to being on their screens, playing video games, or just, watching videos, and aren't used to interacting with other children in the way that they would if the pandemic hadn't struck. How should parents and children, Dr. Agram, be dealing with going back into the big world, which they've been cut off from for the last 2 years?
I think, Rahul, the older kids, I think, will be able to cope with it much better. I think this is mainly a problem for the very younger kids, the ones who are probably 3, 4 years, 5, 6 years of age, when they're actually developing their social skills and they've missed out on this whole sort of couple of years when they've failed to even start the initiation of socializing. Those are the kids who are going to have the biggest problems when we get them back into the community. And they're going to find it very difficult to socialize with other kids. The older kids who have already been in school before, I don't think will have so much of a problem when they restart going back to school. And I'm sure that they will be able to cope with it much better than what we think they will do. Kids generally tend to cope with adverse situations much better than adults. And they do tend to cope very well with it. The younger age group people whom we see who are like between the age of 2 to 5 years, 2 to 6 years, we have seen a lot of problems with them already because most of these kids don't want to talk to other people. They have a lot of stranger anxiety. They don't want to mix with people. They have not even seen so many of their own family members. A lot of the kids were born in the last 2-3 years, last couple of years especially. So this is going to be a problem and there's no easy solution for this. And that is the reason why I feel that whenever we get the opportunity, we need to get kids back into the social group. One being them going back to school with all the precautions, but more importantly for them to mix with other kids, at least in the open areas. So I advise most of my patients when the cases are low and the infectivity rates are very low, that to take kids out to the park so that they play with other people. And as long as they're in open areas and they follow the norms of social distancing, it is usually not such a bad idea to do that.
And Jyoti Arora, we at this moment have a bizarre situation where restaurants are open, so children can go to closed, air-conditioned restaurants where there are lots of people packed in, but they can't go to schools. Do you think it's about time that governments take a concerted call and say publicly that schools should start opening? How do you see this whole debate about reopening, and how would you like to play it out?
We understand well the kind of learning gaps have come due to long closure of schools. It's not just about learning gaps, the socialization gaps. They are away from their teachers, their friends, and the socialization is not happening. And online education was a supplement because there was a time when learning was to be continued. But now this is the time when they should be back to their physical mode of learning because there is no substitute of face-to-face teaching learning process. So it's very, very important that they should come back to the school. We are all set with all our staggered approach and with all our COVID protocols preparations. SOPs regarding the protocols of COVID were released last year only in the month of May, because we had thought of that children will be back to the school somewhere in the month of July. And children are also missing their schools a lot, their friends a lot. And the kind of school is not just a place where academic growth happens. School is a place where so many other kind of growth happens. Children, when they interact with each other, when they socialize with each other, lots of learning.
But Dr. Vatal, do you think it will be possible for schools to enforce COVID-appropriate behavior with children, especially with young children once they come back? Because you're expecting people not to crowd together, keep their masks on. How difficult would that be for teachers and principals to try and implement once schools restart?
There's going to be huge challenges. Nobody said it's going to be easy. But this is where I think schools have to have a sense of accountability. So the question of crowding, because there will be crowding at exits. So, it's a very involved process, that it's better to get them in at different timings. It's better to get them in perhaps in the initial stages. Some group comes in 3 times a week, another group comes in twice a week. So, all those permutation combinations need to be worked at, because you're absolutely right. Because the concern, that is why I said it's important to have a parent walk, because the exit, the entries are all areas where crowding happens. Children are waiting for their cars, or children are waiting to their parents to pick up, and that's what the school cannot vouch for, because it's outside the school premises. The school can vouch for what's happening inside. But I'd like to just take up one quick point that Dr. Raghuram said, and he talked about younger children requiring the need to come to schools. I think it's both. I think the older children have lost the ability to speak. They've lost the ability to debate. They've lost the ability to have a conversation. And these are all very important things when you're looking at career prospects, when you're looking at the bigger world outside, and when you're looking at livelihoods. Because a whole group of children, irrespective of whatever you might have done with them online, you still have those little trophy kids who are doing everything. An entire group of young people, classes 11, 9, 11, 12, have become completely visible, or put their videos off because they get a little put off with this whole, they get bored, they get exhausted. And so there's an entire generation that has lost the whole idea of leadership, of coming together, of teamwork. And these things are going to be seen 10 years down the line when they're going to look out for jobs. And that's when, if in a job interview, how are they going to project themselves? Because they have not been given that kind of a base, because they've not been coming to school. In fact, 2 sections of 11 and 12 have just moved out of school without any kind of leadership abilities that schools build up in its activities, in its programs, in conversations, in all the happenings that happen in a regular school, that the children are missing. So I think for the senior students also, coming back is extremely important. And yes, schools have a big, tall order and a great sense of accountability for school opening.
And I want to show our viewers what's happening globally, because in many countries, schools have started opening despite the fact that children aren't vaccinated. But what's happening in the US, the UK, France and other places where children are now going back to school? Take a look at this report.
Nations across the world are witnessing an uptick in COVID cases due to the highly contagious Delta variant. But most countries have now begun prioritizing in-person learning with precautions. New COVID guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics have recommended even vaccinated students must mask up when back to school. This after the US Center for Disease Control said vaccinated students don't need masks. Different states have varied masking requirements. For instance, students in Kansas can ditch the masks, but Detroit will need them for the unvaccinated. Pittsburgh will see full masking regardless of vaccination status. From August 16th, those under 18 in England will no longer need to self-isolate, even if they come in close contact with a positive case. The system of bubbles, where children only mingled in a fixed year group, has ended, except in some schools. Many schools will no longer have to stagger start and finish timings. More relaxations are in place as face coverings are no longer compulsory, social distancing no longer necessary. But schools in England will close early for summer break or may move online for teaching once again as pupils are being isolated due to the current surge. Scotland is reviewing its approach to self-isolation for school children when they return to school in August. France has announced a vaccination campaign for all students from high school to primary students. It will begin when school starts again in September. China has imposed strict measures. Students will not be allowed back in school in September unless their entire family is fully vaccinated. But rules differ from region to region. Hong Kong has rolled out the Pfizer vaccine to all those about 12 years to allow them to return to normal campus and daily life as soon as possible.
These empty school corridors show that children have remained deprived of in-person and physical education for far too long in the COVID pandemic. But it's still going to take some time because children are suffering from mental issues, because these were the corridors they would play along in, learn in schools that are very important for their physical and mental development. But the vaccines are still far away, and until such time, it's possible that children may have to remain cooped up inside their homes, which could cause them mental stress. With Sanjeev in New Delhi, Milan Sharma for India Today.
Now, on this issue of vaccination for children, Dr. Raghuram, there are many parents who'd wonder if it's worth their while to wait till their children get vaccinated. How much importance would you lay to this question of vaccination? Should they wait for a vaccine to come out for children? How soon do you think that will be, or do you think it doesn't matter as much?
I think vaccination is a very important process in this whole process of rehabilitating children and going back to school. A lot of our patients who come to us, when we see them in the outpatients, they are very clear that they won't send their kids to school till they have been vaccinated. But obviously, vaccination for kids of this age group is still in the pipeline, and we do not know when it is going to come into practice. But I think it's a very, very key important factor, and the government as well as the medical agency should try and forward this process of getting the vaccinations, at least for the 12 to 18-year-old groups, which is very important for them to go back to school. And these vaccines are now available across the world, and we should make an effort to get these vaccinations, because at the end of the day, you can make any policy you want. We can sit here and debate. It all depends upon what parents want. And most of the parents in our experience do feel that their children need to be vaccinated before they go back into the world. It's not that everybody wants to do it, but a majority of them do expect that they will send the children back to school only once they get the vaccination.
Rajiv Dasgupta, your sense at this moment of when the first vaccines for children will be publicly available in India? And is it worth waiting for your child to be vaccinated before sending them back to school, or do you think it's okay even if your children haven't yet been vaccinated?
Now, let me make a few things clear. First, what is under trial in India is vaccination for 12 plus. So that's not going to address the needs of the younger children. Second, the reopening of the schools, at least by the current advisory, is not incumbent upon vaccination, but incumbent upon the local epidemiological assessment at the district or at subnational levels. And there's a clear classification of 4 categories of no cases, sporadic cases, clusters transmission, and community transmission. Now, officially, as we know, India has never been in community transmission. So purely going by officialdom, nothing prevents us from opening up. But nevertheless, even at clusters transmission, there are certain precautions and priorities to be kept in mind. And therefore, there are rules of the game by which we have to play. But one final point, there are states now with positivity rates of above 5, and some, particularly in the Northeast, between 10 and 20. Those are the states which certainly cannot be considered at present. But let's remember, the All India examinations which have now resumed are being applicable for all states. And I think there is a problem there on which we need to take an urgent view.
Okay, interesting. So we've had different perspectives coming in. Zubin Malhotra, to conclude, can you give us a sense of what children who are, slightly older and wondering about life after school should be doing, because they've now been out of action, as Amita Vatal says, that in these years, 9th, 10th, 11th, just as you're on the door of the world outside, how should they be looking at the issue of coming back and trying to expedite whatever learnings may have been lost in the 2 years that they were away from a physical school?
I think the easy answer, there isn't an easy answer, but the answer lies in the mode as to how they have been studying for the last year and a half, which is that the tools and resources that are now available and that have been fast-tracked as a result of the pandemic in online mode, which is available at their fingertips, they've got to utilize them to the absolute hilt. They have to use those not only to pick up additional skills, whether it's communication, whether it's creative thinking, lateral thinking, also use the time that they are actually saving in commuting to and fro from schools to, to develop that into a hobby that they may be interested in, be it on a creative side, be it on programming, coding, what have you. So these students, need to be very clear and focused that life still continues. They are going to be very soon, getting into colleges, getting into universities, getting into jobs. And so they've got to figure out the best way that they will be able to prep themselves going forward. And just a quick point, whether schools open 3 months or a month or 6 months from today, there is going to be a need that schools need to think of as to how are they going to expand their physical and social capital. By that I mean teachers. You can't suddenly just double the number of classrooms to ensure COVID appropriate behavior, but how would they do that in terms of, because this also gives them an opportunity to try and look at smaller class sizes. A lot of our schools have 40, 50 students cramped into classrooms. Let this be a time.
No, but is there infrastructure, Amita Vatal? That's an important point. But most schools that I know of around me or have seen won't have double the classrooms just hanging around where you can put extra students in. You don't have extra teachers either.
No, that's where hybrid learning comes in, Rahul. That's why I've been propagating the whole understanding of, you don't bring in 40 kids from class, say, 10A on the same day. So, you have to really think very mathematically, scientifically. It's an exercise like a timetable that you get certain children in on certain days, so you don't crowd rooms. And that's extremely essential. And I think what I think it was Zubin who just mentioned, that it's very, very essential that we must bring in lesser children. And perhaps as a result of that, schools will stand back because, admissions are not happening. There are all issues which are connected to fees and such. So, perhaps schools will more schools may be created. Schools will become smaller, more deeper learning spaces because of COVID. So there may be a great opportunity that we have here to connect with young people, because there will be, say, 15 in a class or 20 in a class. And I think that is what we have to ensure. The children are not going to come back like 200 kids in one section of class 11 don't come back together. So hybrid learning has to be done. It is both synchronous and asynchronous kind of understanding of learning which has to be brought in. And that's what COVID has taught us. Perhaps that's the opportunity that we've got, and an opportunity to run really well-structured, smaller, and smaller is always beautiful, and not have big auditoriums and these huge annual days which just are useless, a waste of money. But focus more on the child's development, his critical thinking, his skilling, his potential, than just have these, huge, glamorous.
Okay, so this has been an important conversation. I'm glad we could have it, because there's a lot to think about, a lot to act on as we go about reopening our schools. Now, not much in the distant future. The reopening process has started. It's about how to do it in a way that you're able to ensure that children have high learning outcomes, but yet their medical health is not endangered. For the time being, I want to thank all our guests for joining us for this very important conversation that's got parents, WhatsApp groups, school groups all charged up and debating whether or not and when schools should reopen. So I hope you found this useful.